Gadamer is, unlike Heidegger, not a man of great gestures. He doesn't think in large pictures, but this is also the charm of his philosophy. He just tries to rethink the history of Western thought and make us attentive, alert, susceptible to things that happened in the history. Of course, Heidegger did this with epochal analytics, and let's just focus on one development that, according to Gadamer, is also very significant for our current era. Because Truth and Method kicks off with a contemplation on the tradition of humanism in Western culture, which was founded by Petrarca and Ficino, but also Pico della Mirandola, and of course in our own country, Erasmus, the tradition of humanism. And humanism was a tradition that had its own stature at universities. It had its own methodology. And the methodology of humanism was the ars interpretandi, so the arts of interpretation. That was the crucial methodology of humanism. For us today, it sounds almost ludicrous, petty. But for hundreds of years, this was the way that students were introduced into the world of the academy. And the ars interpretandi consisted of three virtues, three subtleties, three susceptibilities: the subtilitas intelligendi, the subtilitas explicandi, and the subtilitas applicandi. There is something, when you read a text, you need a subtilitas intelligendi. You need a subtlety to understand what is happening in this text, to really read the text, to take it seriously. And you need a subtlety to explain the text, to find its meanings even. And you need also the subtlety to apply, the subtilitas applicandi, to apply the text in your life or in practice. Of course, the theology and the studies of law, there was the subtilitas applicandi, how you apply what you have understood and explained in your practice as a priest or as a judge. There were other virtues that were very, very important. Taste. You had to have good taste. You had to have tactfulness. You had to have sensus communis, so a sense of what is happening around you, a sense of what is going on in other people's minds. These are all things that we would say, what does that have to do with science? What does that have to do with academia? I believe it's very tragic that we have abandoned this entire tradition of humanism at universities. You know, you might say there's, to understand what I'm saying, there's a difference between tact and etiquette. And I wouldn't say that science is etiquette, but it's protocols, procedures that you learn, ways of doing investigations. Tact is something you can't learn. You have to become a real human being. You have to be educated yourself. You have to educate yourself too, to become a full human being, to be able to express tact. I was once at a funeral. You have it in Holland. You have these books on how to behave. Nobody reads them anymore, but in the 50s, 60s, how to behave. And there was always something, well, at a funeral, never go to the widow or whatever and make a joke, because that is not the situation for jokes. And once I thought I made a big mistake. There was this captain of industry, one of the richest men in Holland, who had died, and his widow was there, and I knew she didn't really like him, but she admired her husband. And I said, when we were sitting in the cars following your husband's car, it was no surprise to me that your husband was ahead of us all as usual. You know, just small. It wasn't even that funny if I think about it right now. But it lightened the air. There's tact. Tact is something that you can have, and you can do anything if you're tactful. anything. Doesn't mean that you can do anything, but it's a world of human relationships that we completely forgot. And the culprit in this story is Descartes. Descartes killed humanism.
Welcome back to Verse Philosophy. My name is Sonia Schwetz.
My name is Kas Gadamer.
And we're happy to welcome you during the second Gadamer episode.
Yeah.
Starting strong here with immediately trashing Descartes.
Yeah. The killer of humanism.
Yeah. Or as Kas wrote in our notes.
The killer of the radio star.
Indeed. I wish maybe we can put in the music. Descartes is being accused of killing humanism, which I see where this is coming from.
Yeah.
Right? Because Descartes was talking, I don't think he intended to kill humanism, but I think what Awee is trying to convey with this is just how focused Descartes was on the clarity of ideas, and that ideas need to be clear and distinct, and only then we can think through. So it doesn't leave the space for this more intuitive things that surpass the scientific knowledge, that spill over it, that have this surplus of meaning.
Yeah, Awee is going to expand on that in the minutes to come, of course. The only thing that would be interesting to point out as well is that there are, I think we've mentioned this earlier in a previous episode as well, but there are a lot of Descartes.
Yeah.
There's the thing that we talked about in the last episode about being able to read philosophers in different ways also goes for Descartes. And I think there are some people who would be really unhappy with this reading of Descartes.
Yeah.
I would still say stick with it for a while. Take it seriously. Like, even if Descartes didn't intend to kill the humanist tradition, I think we should still be able to read it like that.
Yeah, and sometimes the consequences of something spiral a bit out of control. I'm very sympathetic to Descartes, but is it completely reasonable to actually trace this technologism that we inhabit from Descartes? If you wish to take that as a starting point, yes, it is a completely valid reading.
Yeah. And it is interesting to see that the distinction between tact and etiquette that Awee talks about, that you could also say, also tying that back to the previous episode, that instead of having intuitive manners or intuitive ways of like treating people, rules have to be set.
Yeah.
It has to be almost the same with the technological attunement towards the world. You can measure how you should behave. It's almost like either you succeed in behaving by having a binary yes, did you behave, instead of relating yourself in a situation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think also, Awee, talking about this kind of, in a way, loss of humanist education is not really a niche issue. No. I think you see this, I mean, we inhabit and perpetuate this lack of humanist education everywhere, really, and many people do. But at the same time, there is this yearning for those olden days where you would be taught, more ephemeral things, right? That is why I think that is one of the reasons why people really romanticize historical escort professions like geishas, for example. People really like to be like, yeah, they really needed to uphold the conversation and be so tactful and be really know these rules. And I think in this you can kind of in this reverence to something that was considered quite normal, you can feel the yearning to this before the education was, really rounded up. So I think it's ever present.
Yeah. And I mean, to talk about a Dutch contemporary television program, there are a lot of people were really focused on a program where personal butlers were being trained. which was absolutely mad to see. Like the strictness and the level of it, but there was a very appreciative, very passive consumption of that program, with this romantic yearning for things to be very clear. It is very clear how one should act, which is...
Yeah, but I mean, it's also very understandable why we all, well, a lot of us, at least, I think everyone, at least at some point in their life, really wish that it was extremely clear how to act.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough.
But it's part of it. One also has to try to be comfortable with, well, yeah, the surplus of meaning. Because otherwise we're continuously stuck, of course, in this technological attunement.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's hear him out. Let's discover how Descartes killed the radio star. Let's discover how Descartes killed humanism. Is it recording?
Radio star.
Descartes replaced all the virtues, all the ideals of humanism by saying, no, at the academy it's all about certainty, proof, ideas claires et distinctes. We need to have clear and distinct ideas, discrete. We have discrete ideas. And just a small exercise in stirring thinking. The word discrete means that it is well divided. Well divided. That's what we all want to be, discrete. The word indiscreet means that you are blunt, you're rough, you're indiscreet. It just means indiscreet. The only thing the word means, it's not separated. And I think that the world as such is not separated. All our feelings are mixed feelings, all our thoughts are mixed thoughts, all our deeds are mixed deeds. So there is no such thing as discrete. And there's another thing that made me think, some years ago when I contemplated on this. To be discreet also means to keep a secret. To keep a secret, being discreet. And I think the best kept secret in the academic world, and even in the Western world, the best kept secret is that we do not live in a discrete world. We do not live in a world where things can be separated at all. We have to face the chaos, the mixedness of life. Uralte Verwirrung, Hölderlin called it. But even Descartes lived in this hermeneutic universe, although he forgot about it. He didn't want to acknowledge it. He wanted to have straightforward, clear ideas and distinct ideas. Everywhere, everything is an interpretation. It sounds like a metaphysical statement. They once asked Wittgenstein when he made his linguistic turn, it was hermeneutical turn after the Tractatus. And he said, well, if you say that everything is an interpretation, that is still a very metaphysical expression. And he says, I agree. So I'll just show it to you. I'll just show it to you. And he said, you can't take a game. You want to have a definition of a game? You can't give a definition of a game. There are games where there's a ball involved or not a ball involved. There's a board involved or not a board involved. There are only family resemblances, Wittgenstein says. So this is the patchwork of interpretations. That's all we can do. Now, hermeneutics stems from Hermes. Hermes is a half-god, and he was in Greek mythology the messenger of the gods. And this is very important to notice. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. So in Greek mythology, when the gods wanted to convey something to the human beings, they sent Hermes to tell them this message. But Hermes always spoke in obscure words, in oracular language. It was not easy to understand. Now this is why hermeneutics is symbolized by Hermes. Hermes was the god of thieves, the god of travelers, the god of locksmiths, but he was also the god of progress, of medicine. And what is Hermes doing? He's bringing a message from a strange world, for us, a strange world, the world of the gods, to our familiar world, the human world. Now, this can be extrapolated to many other movements. When you read a book, there is this hermeneutical, Hermes-like movement from the message from a strange world, the text, which may be written long, long time ago, makes it even more difficult, the strange world of the text to the familiar world of you as a reader. It is also the conveying of a message from the past. This is what history does, historical sciences do. Messages from the past, or truths from the past, to our present world. But also a foreign culture, is a strange culture, try to bring these messages. Again, they sound like oracular language. I remember when I first read the Quran, I found it very difficult to read it, because I'm used to the Bible. I'm used to the storytelling of the Bible. And the Quran is an exclamation of worship towards Allah. And I found it very difficult to read. It was something I couldn't easily bring this message to my familiar world. And you also have to realize, because the world of the gods can never be reached, there's also always this limit, and remember this very well, there's this unsurmountable limit in the text, in the past, in other cultures. We can never reach it. There's always the strangeness, the surplus of meaning that we cannot achieve. So there's something humble about hermeneutics. But this is what hermeneutics does. It tries to transport a message from a strange world to a familiar world. And Heidegger coined this movement also as the hermeneutic circle, which is not a vicious circle. The hermeneutic circle is like reinterpreting, rereading, reinterpreting again and again and again with no end. This is what we are. This is where we live in. And the big thing, Heidegger says, is not to get out of this circle, but really to get into it. If you read a poem, you will notice that you have some, you discover some things in the poem, but then you read it again, and maybe so many years later you read it again, and you find new significances, new meanings. And this is, one would say, yeah, but that's poetry. No, this goes for everything. I gave you the examples. I gave you Hitler as an example, Nietzsche as an example. Again and again, we reinterpret without progress. There's no saying that we now know Nietzsche better than anyone else did before us. That would be ridiculous. We have to get used to this predicament. It's not a predicament, it's something wonderful. This is what the hermeneutic circle, this is what the hermeneutic universe means, that we're always reinterpreting and reinterpreting and reinterpreting. It's a never-ending going on. Now, to illustrate this, Gadamer does something very strange. No, it's not that strange. He says, I'm looking for the greatest enemy of this theory, that it was only a fortgang, a process without. And that is enlightenment. The Enlightenment is particularly this movement in Western culture where we think we can get rid of the phenomena of interpretation, or as Enlightenment would put it, prejudice. The Enlightenment is one big fight against prejudices. The first big book on the Enlightenment, Francis Bacon's Idols, Novum Organum, where he writes about the idols of the soul. There's the idol of the tribe, the habits that we have, which blur our minds. You have a habit, you're habituated to a way of thinking, of looking, and this muddles your mind. There's the idols of the cave, your passions. You might be very passionate about something and you can't think straight. There's the idol of, you don't have to remember this, don't worry. There's the idol of the marketplace. So there's traditions. The theater, sorry, the idol of the theater, which is the tradition, the things that our teachers, the lies our teachers tell us, some would say. And then there's the marketplace, public life, das Gerede, Heidegger would say, where everybody talks about everything. We have to get rid of this. And this is, of course, what Descartes did, methodological doubt. Doubt everything, and then you'll come to certainty. Kant, sapere aude, only trust your true common sense or trust your real rational mind. We don't like people with prejudice. If I would say, well, I'm having a party next week and I'll invite everybody I know with prejudices, I don't even want to give that party. We don't like people with prejudices. Now, Gadamer points out, in an ontological sense, that there's a peculiar prejudice of the Enlightenment, and that is the prejudice against prejudices. Try to understand this. There's a peculiar prejudice against prejudices. So the Enlightenment thinks that we can get rid of prejudices. Well, in fact, we can't. It's a prejudice against prejudices. I'll show you how it works. All thinkers of the Enlightenment have two sources of prejudices: haste and authority. Those are the two main dangers of rationality. You're in haste, you have to find make a quick decision, and then you have and you make a judgment, but the judgment is not final, it's not correct. Even judges have this prejudgment in legal law, where they have voorlopige hechtenis. They incarcerate someone for the time being, but they haven't made their real judgment yet. So we have this idea there's a prejudgment because we don't have the time yet to really look at the matter completely and thoroughly. But haste, ontologically speaking, is a very nasty word for temporality. We are temporal, which means that we will never, I'll make it big, we will never come to the final judgment. I'm not going into religion now. There is no final judgment that comes after us. There is no final judgment in life. Every judgment, ontologically speaking, is necessarily a pre-judgment, without a pejorative meaning about it. There are only pre-judgments. No one has ever made a final judgment. So most philosophers don't even look at this phenomena of haste, and even Gadamer only has 10 or 15 phrases on it. But when I read it as a young man, it made me think. I said, no, Gadamer, you can go deeper, you can delve deeper here. This is much more interesting than you make us believe it is. Haste is a nasty word for temporality. Now let's look at the second one, authority. Authority is indeed a source of much prejudice. Yeah? Authorities tell us, and it's remarkable, Gadamer wrote his book in 1960, so the beginning of the 60s, which was one big fight against the authorities. When I was very young, if I heard the word authorities, I would pick up a rock and throw it, just to make sure that I would hit someone who may be an authority. We didn't like authorities. I was too young to be a hippie, mind you, fortunately. But Gadamer says there is a rehabilitation of tradition necessary. Tradition, of authority. Sorry, I'm going too fast, I'm an old man. Authority is not only about obedience, it's not about blind or stupid obedience, authority. Of course, there is inauthentic authority. Befehl ist Befehl. Inauthentic authority is that someone is just in power and he forces you to do what he wants you to do. That is indeed authority that the Enlightenment rightfully so fought against. But there's also something like authentic authority. The authority that is acknowledged. We acknowledge an authority. We respect authority. If you go to the class by Wiep van Bungen on enlightenment, there he is an authority, and you respect him as someone who knows what the early and high enlightenment are. You don't say, oh, he's an authority, and never throw bricks at me. There is something, if I have an operation on my heart, And the doctors begin, and I would say, no, better do it another way. Do it another way. I don't think this is the right thing, the way to go. I wouldn't. Thankfully so. He's an authority. I once had someone replace my central heating in my house, and I thought I had a better plan. I'm cold since. The whole house is completely cold. Well, it's good to pay for your stupidities. Although the distinction between inauthentic and authentic authority makes sense, it's also, and Gadamer is not clear about this, we also have to be a bit critical about it. Because we now live in times where every time there's a problem, authorities come. On TV, on talk shows, there's an authority. Prof, doctor, ingenieur, and whatever, and he's an authority. So I think you must be careful, but I hope you get the gist. It's not that simple as the Enlightenment tells us. The same goes for tradition. According to the Enlightenment, especially Descartes, tradition was something to be completely doubted. Tradition is like a stone hanging on your shoulders. Tradition. Gadamer argues there is only tradition if it is preserved, cherished, and acknowledged. That's authentic tradition. We have to acknowledge tradition. We have to embrace it. We have to take it seriously. Otherwise, it just fades away. Take Thomas Aquinas, one of the great philosophers of Western history. Nobody reads Thomas Aquinas anymore. It's tradition. It faded away. That we read Kant is not a tradition and something that we have to get rid of. No, we think Kant really still has something to say to us. The same goes for, and this is a very controversial passage in Gadamer's philosophy, he talks about classic, the concept classical music, classical literature. And we have a tendency, especially since Hegel, to see this concept as a descriptive concept. Classic. This is classic literature, classic philosophy, classic music. Gadamer says no. Ultimately speaking, or hermeneutically speaking, let's put it better. Hermeneutically speaking, classic is a normative concept. It is us who decide that Bach and Brahms and Beethoven are still important to us. We may, in the future, decide otherwise. So classic, and whether the Bohemian Rhapsody is really a classic remains to be seen. I hope that generations to come will not put it on the list of best songs ever. These things change. So even classic is a normative conception. So this hermeneutic universe is just a patchwork of interpretation.
So we've heard Awee come in with great insights on Gadamer and just how annoying Bohemian Rhapsody is. And I'm sorry for any fans that I might be alienating. But truth cannot be concealed. Another interesting thing that Awee mentions is, well, something that is dear to me, this idea that there is a certain insurmountable limit in the text. Yeah. And he applies it for to cultures. We can also apply it to just literature texts. So he says there is always a strangeness and the surplus of meaning we cannot achieve. And I think, well, I'd like to encourage our listeners to stick with this and keep thinking about this surplus of meaning and surplus of, actually what I want to say is just surplus of meaning. It's a bit of a kind of Chekhov's gun, once again, foreshadowing something that is to come in Levinas that is that I find very interesting. But yeah, just sticking with this idea that when you're communicating, even within the same culture, there is simply too much meaning for it to be, quote unquote, metabolized in a very secure way. There's always a certain excess. You can think of it like very prosaically as a context that a person might miss, or as an internal disposition that another person can miss. This is the very rude or crude way of describing the surplus. But this is something that is very interesting to keep in mind, this surplus, without which maybe language would not be possible, because what are we talking about if there is no mysterious surplus?
Yeah, yeah, and I really like it specifically in relation to studying different cultures or being like confronted with different cultures. Also in philosophy, because I think many of our fellow students have at least some interest in like non-European philosophy, and there are definitely books to that and translations that are available. But one thing is that where you should always watch out for or should be aware of is that you miss a lot of surplus.
Yeah.
Like I followed a course in Amsterdam for a while on like one specific book, and I think we had like 4 or 5 lectures just providing some of the historical and cultural context, and we were close reading the book together, and then it was a book by Kaiji Nishitani, and he used a certain phrase. He was like, "Oh yeah, that means like this and this. You that won't take too long to explain. Just go with it." And that could be. Some people find that demoralizing, or then say that you cannot talk with each other about this, or it's impossible to understand, so you shouldn't even try. I think this is also where a lot of the joy in engaging with things you do not yet grasp come from. Because if you approach it with the idea that you're able to completely grasp it, you're going to miss too much anyway. Like even as something that is written contemporarily by someone from a very similar culture to you, if you go, oh, I'm going to grasp it all, you're not.
No.
You will grasp less. But if you're like open to meaning, open to this surplus, I think the joy in reading either literature or philosophy grows.
Yeah. And once again, I think if returning to Descartes, right, if everything is clear and distinct, what would we talk about at all? Everything is already clear. We have a common understanding that is that you cannot question, because everything is clear and distinct. There is no surplus to talk over.
Yeah.
So I think, well, I'm being very dishonest, right? I'm saying it as if I'm so smart, but this is something that Lacan would say.
Yeah.
This is a psychoanalytical notion, but that doesn't matter too much.
No. Lacan liked terminology to a degree.
Yeah. There's a very interesting lineage, but that's another thing.
That's for another time.
Yeah.
So sticking with Descartes for a short while, the prejudice against prejudice. I think in our preparation we talked too long about this.
That's true.
So we have too much to say. So let's try to keep it slightly brief. Yeah, the prejudice against prejudice. Why do we think that's bad?
I mean, the thing is that I don't necessarily think that prejudices is bad. No. I don't think it is good either. No. It's just something that exists, right? Yeah. And in connection to this, I said when we were discussing it that this, I think, ties into what people fail to consider a lot of the time, which is the famous tolerance paradox, right? Which really is illustrative. Is in Heideggerian terms, this ontic, illustration of this principle, which of course the tolerance or intolerance paradox is that simply to create an inclusive space, you also must exclude certain elements, right? Yeah. Like if you have like a safe space for queer people, you have to exclude homophobic people, you know, in the plainest terms, basically. Yeah. And so in that case, you have prejudice against prejudices.
Sure, yeah.
But it is inescapable.
We also talked about prejudice against prejudice as something that if you first encounter philosophy, that really feels like opening up the space. It's like, yeah, exactly. And then like, when you move slightly deeper into understanding philosophy, then it becomes a bit like, but actually there is meaning we should stick to, and there is way. And then like, if you move further again, you kind of move back into, yes.
Yeah, right. You're just very resistant to describing it as a bell curve.
Yeah, I'm very resistant to describing it as a bell curve. But I think that fits. Yeah, sure. It is a bell. Yeah, it is a bell. But it reminded me kind of the parable in the beginning of Also sprach Zarathustra by Nietzsche, where the one trying to acquire knowledge is first like a lion attacking everything and like the dead set on knowledge, and then moving into the desert, carrying the burden of knowledge, like as a camel, I believe the animal is, and then eventually ending up as the dancing child. Who's like who doesn't need to stick with certain preconceptions. And I think that kind of fits.
Yeah.
This theme.
So maybe the important thing is to not ever be under the illusion that you can completely get it against all the prejudices, including the prejudice against prejudice.
Yeah.
But open your heart and mind to being fluid with it.
Yeah. It's always a good advice to be fluid with this.
Of course. Be the dancing child with it.
Be the dancing child with it.
Now Gadamer comes with a very curious distinction. He says, okay, every judgment is a pre-judgment, true. Every judgment is an interpretation, which may be changed, not corrected, changed. But then he says, at a certain point in the text, he says there is a difference between legitimate and illegitimate prejudices. Now it becomes funny. So there's legitimate prejudices and illegitimate prejudices. Now, you might think, we're all scientists, that an illegitimate prejudice would be a prejudice that doesn't make sense. That would be your first inclination, maybe. An illegitimate prejudice is, for instance, I come home tonight and I see smoke coming from under my front door. And I think, well, it might be fire, but there might be 5 gnomes puffing and smoking my Cuban cigars behind my front door. I don't know. So I open the door, and there they are with my Monte Cristos. That's not it. An illegitimate prejudice is a prejudice which doesn't acknowledge itself to be a prejudice. Yeah? So an illegitimate prejudice is a dogma, an ideology, where you say, this is the truth. What I'm saying is the truth. No doubt about it. That is an illegitimate prejudice. So it's about attitude. A legitimate prejudice is not that I thought it was 5 gnomes smoking cigars, and yes, there they are. No, a legitimate prejudice is a prejudice that understands itself as a prejudice. It's a prejudice that is, as such, putting itself at stake, calling itself a prejudice. Some have made the distinction between authentic prejudices and inauthentic prejudices. An authentic prejudice is a prejudice in which you acknowledge, this is the way I look at it, and I will give you my reasons. And an illegitimate prejudice is not saying, this is the way I look at it. An illegitimate prejudice would say, this is the way it is. No discussion, no comment. So Gadamer apparently moves from phenomenology to hermeneutics by saying there's a hermeneutic universe of interpretations. And he addresses the future. And he says, if we realize this, and we have this legitimate and illegitimate prejudices, and what happens if we have legitimate prejudices, both of us? I talked to someone with a legitimate prejudice, or the courage, it takes courage. And what happens? And Gadamer says there may become a fusion of horizons. So everybody has his horizons, his own interpretive scheme of the world. I meet someone from the Islamic background, he has his own horizon, and there may be a fusion of horizons in which we both change, Gadamer says. It's very important, we both change. We end up not being what we were before. That's a very beautiful concept that he has. Very briefly, Gadamer is been called an ironic philosopher, so a philosopher of peaceful understanding. Derrida, who was a friend, and well, rather friend of Gadamer, they had their terrible discussions, said, no, it's too simple, Gadamer, it's too simple. There is no fusion of horizons. There are indeed horizons, but they are dispersed. There is an archipelago of horizons. There is no dialogue with a fusion of horizons. You must understand that a dialogue is just two people, each standing on a hill, talking to each other, and the wind takes away half of the conversation. So not only the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, but the entire dialogue is blowing in the wind. There is no hermeneutic circle. There's only a porous circle with holes in it. There's misunderstanding, there's strange things happen in a conversation. And Derrida, I'm a great admirer, also said, well, you see, Gadamer, about dialogue with Gadamer, it always has to be the same kind of dialogue. If you look at the academy, there's someone giving a lecture, and then two people are asked to respond critically, then there's a brief moment of discussion, and then everybody goes home. That is the university. We once had a conference on African philosophy here, and someone came up, and he only had 15 minutes, and he started talking. I said, I was asked to talk about Rorty, but I don't only want to talk about Rorty, I also want to talk about him and her and this and that. Parlay, we would call that, neocolonialism. And the organizers were looking at me and said, stop him, this can't be done. And I decided, just let it be, let it go. And it was a wonderful, wonderful meeting in which not the same structure of dialogue was attempted, but a completely different way. Maybe a dialogue is just sitting in a circle, not talking. There are many forms of dialogue, so Gadamer is a bit too simple. And then there's Habermas, who says, well, you can't have a dialogue if you don't have the capability of doing a dialogue. You have to have this capacity of doing a dialogue. You have to have competence in a dialogue. And Piaget gave this example. This is a nice thing. You can check it at home if you have nieces or nephews of that age. Piaget once said that there's two children, a brother and a sister, and their mother is making a dress. And the boy wants to help his mother, but he cuts a very big hole in the dress. Big hole. The daughter, like many daughters, doesn't really like her mother. She wants to tease her mother, so she sneaks up to the dress and she cuts in a very tiny hole. If you ask children of around 4 years old who did the worst thing, they would all say the boy, because he made the bigger hole in the dress. When they get older, you ask it again after a year, they would say the girl, because it was the intention. It's the intention that counts, and not the material damage. So this is operational thinking. So Piaget said you have to, and Habermas points out to that example, people have to have a certain maturity to come into a hermeneutical dialogue. I will not go into this. I just want to point out that Gadamer has a position, and this position has been, which is also interesting because it's hermeneutics, challenged from different angles, that there are many ways of thinking about hermeneutics.
One of very interesting and once again very kind of building up to the, well, for me, building up to the to Levinas quite soon, is Awee mentioning this fusion of horizons that Gadamer discusses, right? So we're kind of back to this problem of intersubjectivity that you could really see come up with Heidegger, with Das Mann. You could see it come up with Sartre, of course. In fact, Awee talked very explicitly about Sartre's conception of intersubjectivity. And now we're also seeing this, just in one phrase, from Gadamer, right? This hope for possibly the fusion of horizons, right? A horizon here in a phenomenological sense, right? Yeah. As kind of the horizon of one's experience and hence knowledge, or yes. Many other words that maybe are more suitable here than knowledge. So it's interesting to kind of see the lineage of these thoughts on intersubjectivity, with now reaching this fusion of horizons, which I personally have many questions about. I wonder if, well, I haven't read Truth and Method, and I wonder if fusion of horizons here just if it implies a mixing of them and there being some shared horizon now, or if it just refers to maybe them interlapping. Very interesting things to talk about. And maybe in this, of course, also Derrida, as always, keeps showing up. And as opposed to the fusion of horizons, he would talk about the archipelago of, not of horizon, but I think archipelago. And there is this quote from Derrida that a dialogue is just two people, each standing on a hill, talking to each other, and the wind takes away half of the conversation.
Yeah, beautiful phrase.
Beautiful phrase,
Beautiful
not very
phrase.
optimistic.
No, not very optimistic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not. I do like the image of the fusion of horizons. I haven't read Truth and Method either, so I'm not completely sure. But what I remember that I envisaged it in the way that you would stand somewhere with someone else, someone like pointing to something on like the horizon that you both have that they would really pay attention to. Like, have you seen that? Like, and then for the first time seeing something
Right.
in like a different way. Like, I think like combining the two horizons or let them overlap and like suddenly seeing double, like that also would be ridiculous. And maybe in that sense, Derrida is completely right to say that there's no fusion of horizons possible.
Yeah.
But I try to see it in that specific way. Like I try to, like someone suddenly pointing something out, or like you see two buildings to each other, and these are buildings that you have lived in, or that your friends have lived in, and then someone points something out about one of these buildings, and suddenly they become detached for the first time in your life.
Yeah.
And like that sense, like these two horizons are able to exist besides each other or beneath each other. I like that way of regarding philosophy. That's also, if you once again talking about the relation between Western and Japanese philosophy, that I'm definitely not an expert in by any. So there is also like a completely different ontology.
Yeah.
And it is, you cannot see two ontologies at once. That is like however, you can have this horizon in which you are able to approach something from these two different points. You can have like two different gazes, maybe,
Right.
even. And I'm not sure if that is a correct interpretation of Gadamer, but it did really, well, inspire me.
Struck a nerve once again.
Struck a nerve once again. It is like revisiting this episode really confronted me with how influential this lecture has been in my philosophy studies. And I don't think I would have pointed that out if you would have asked me without listening back to this.
There you go.
Yeah.
It goes back to your point, us both supposing that if people were to rank their favorites from this series of lectures, Gadamer maybe is a less, probably more people would have him more down the list. But I think it's something that really sips into your thinking. It sneaks up on you.
It is like my first published article starts with a Gadamer quote.
Oh, there you go.
I looked that up this morning. It's like there was from Truth and Method.
Oh,
It starts with that.
okay.
It's one of the very first things written down.
Yeah, it's a funny way to out yourself.
Yeah.
Now that you said that you haven't read Truth and Method.
No. It was from the part that we
Tip how to use quotes. You can just take them from anywhere.
It was from the introduction that we had to read for this course. So I haven't read the entire book. I have read the listed readings.
Yes.
And in that introduction, it already opens up to these different forms of interpretation, and that is what I wanted to use.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I was also thinking that, well, a couple of names have been thrown around. Obviously, Derrida, which he was mentioned before, but we never really expanded. And also Habermas has been mentioned. And I thought maybe it would be nice if we just introduce them extremely shortly, who they were and why they are important, I guess, or what they're known for. And with Derrida, I think we also already mentioned, of course, that he's kind of widely considered the father of postmodern thinking, for which, of course, many people dislike him a lot. Many people like him a lot. A very divisive, in that sense, philosopher.
Yeah.
But I think an extremely interesting one.
Yeah. And also it is someone who really follows Heidegger, but also really treads his own path in a way that is interesting. Read on so many different topics that it would be difficult to give a concise overview, but still to this day a very, very influential philosopher.
Yeah.
And occasionally I read something by Derrida and I realize, oh, that was him.
Yeah. I mean, we already talked about deconstruction, right?
Yeah.
Which is, it's impossible to imagine any recent philosophy without the notion of deconstruction being present.
Yeah, or a pretentious restaurant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Deconstructed burger. That's not too fancy. There are many interesting ideas. I would say that if this sparks your interest, that it's definitely worth checking out what Derrida did, maybe with also a very interesting conception of parergon and how the inside is separated from the outside.
It is specifically in relation. It starts as in relation to art. So that the list of an artwork is part of the artwork.
Exactly.
There's a rereading of Kant.
Yeah.
Derrida was a good reader.
Which is also how I think that was the context in which he came up in the lectures for the first time.
Have you read all of these books? No, I've read only some of them, but really, really thorough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn from Derrida, and maybe the reading ethic.
And this is also where he really ties in with Gadamer. This is that what Derrida did brilliantly was focusing on one specific idea or one specific sentence and trying to understand the rest of the work from that sentence. That is where because that was an idea in Kant's Kritik der Urteilskraft, so critique of
Judgment?
Okay.
where Kant writes about aesthetics and also mentions the parergon, the list of the artwork, to say it like easily. And then suddenly that becomes the entire crux of the philosophy.
Yeah.
Of the text, and then Derrida starts working that out. No, but that is a very good exercise in reading.
Yeah.
Which is very impressive.
Yeah. Besides exercise in reading, there's also exercise in talking, which is my segue to Habermas. Yes. Just once again, as a small introduction, Habermas, yet another German philosopher, still alive today. So, one of the few people who we're talking about who is still alive and kicking. And I mean, Habermas is really most famous for his idea of deliberative democracy, his political and social thinking, and thinking about discursive spaces, who is included in the discourse, who is excluded from it, and how such a thing as deliberative, so discourse-based democracy can function at all, and can it? That is roughly Habermas.
A very influential figure in the shaping of the EU as well.
So by all means, both extremely interesting philosophers, if you have interest and time. And we are going to move on to Awee's relaying personal experiencing, illustrating Gadamer's points.
I want to conclude with two personal experiences that I had, which to show you how much Gadamer, in a way, meant to me, what I could use from him. Because in Gadamer's philosophy, there is a hidden ethics in his hermeneutics. In some way, he tells us we have to have the courage to put your prejudices at stake. You have to have the courage to make them legitimate. Legitimate means that you venture them, that you are prepared to accept different positions and find perhaps a more common ground. The first is a congress that I chaired in Istanbul on modern art. And I was here with Rudy Fuchs, Chris Derk, and all the big shots of the Dutch art world. And there was an Islamic architect, Ganchever, I'll never forget him, an old guy. And he said, art is life-enhancing, refining, and humane. Art is life-enhancing, refining, and humane. And I didn't. They started laughing and laughing and laughing. This stupidity. Because art, for us, contemporary Western people, is innovating, controversial, provocative. And the entire conference, I asked, why? Why do we think that this is true and this is not true? Why can't we live in a hermeneutic universe in which we acknowledge that there are different approaches to art? It's such a sad. I'll give you another painful example, painful in many ways. A congress in Cairo that I chaired on cruel initiation, so initiation rites, the rite de passage in northern Africa. And the conference was about circumcision practices, but also the cruelty of which young boys were treated when they were sent into the bush, and then they had to stay there for weeks, and then in order to become a man, and all that. Cruelty. Of course, I still, of course, believe that circumcision is a terrible, terrible, cruel practice. I believe. So I went to my hotel room, and this was the first time I did stirring thinking. I didn't even know the term. And I said to myself, let's try. For me, let's try to. We talked the North Atlantic delegation. We talk about these cruel initiation rites of this culture. What are the cruel initiation rites of Western culture? I asked myself. And I had a whole list, very productive night. I'll only mention two. Our culture, the cruelty of our culture, your upbringing, don't blame your parents, which is part of Western culture, is an initiation in loneliness and solitude. That is what all our culture is all about. We are initiating all our children into loneliness and solitude. We call this individualism. We all want our children to be individuals who are independent. If you have a child and you keep the child when it just was born, you keep them with the parents in the bedroom of the parents, there will also always be many people coming to you, don't do it, no, it remains too dependent on you, it has to sleep alone, it has to become an independent, autonomous subject. So this ideal of the Enlightenment par excellence, of becoming an autonomous, rational subject, is in fact a cruel initiation in loneliness and solitude. There's a song by the Beatles, all the lonely people, where do they all come from? I'll tell you where they come from Western upbringing, Western culture. We're very cruel. Second, cruel initiation rite. The initiation in tarnish and disenchantment. The initiation that we, in fact, cherish. Max Weber has become famous for his theory on Entzauberung, onttovering in English, disenchantment of the world. We no longer, because we've become scientific, we no longer believe in magic. We don't no longer believe in religion. We may believe in religion, but that's something for at home, in the private sphere. In the public sphere, it's all about proof, evidence, science. So the cruelty of this is that we all now live in a world devoid of mystery, a world devoid of wonder, a world in which we can only measure and calculate things. I'm not going back to Heidegger. There's no enchantment left. Yeah? For us, mystery, that is the riddles of a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku. That is the mystery of the world to us. It's very sad. I remember when I was a young kid, my sisters, I had 3 sisters. I was the youngest, the only boy at home. And they came to my room and told me that Santa Claus didn't exist. They did. Oh, they loved it. They loved it. The only thing I remember was not the disenchantment, their cruelty. Such cruelty. The family story goes that I said, well, in how many years are you going to tell me that God doesn't exist? I was a clever little kid, you know. Because I was only 5, it was very mean. Well, so these are just some cruel initiation rites of Western culture that I think are important to understand, to really deal with this hermeneutic universe. We cannot divide the hermeneutic universe in practices that are right and practices that are wrong. It takes the courage to put your own prejudices at stake. And again, there is a hidden ethics in Gadamer. To realize that each judgment is a prejudgment, and accepting the challenge of living in a hermeneutic universe, a hermeneutic world, can really, and according to Gadamer, it could make it a better world. But also Habermas wanted it to become a better world. Derrida was more hesitant about this humanistic attitude toward hermeneutics. Developments after Gadamer, of course, there's this discussion with Habermas and Derrida and many others, Appel, and that is an interesting thing. But there's also recent developments in phenomenology and hermeneutics which show that phenomenology and hermeneutics are in a way much less problematic as they were thought to be in Gadamer and Heidegger and Husserl. They belong together. They can really have a fruitful combination. There's a fruitful fusion of phenomenology and hermeneutics. For instance, in standpoint theory, that's something that's very actual these days. Standpoint theory is the idea within the academy that there are positions, especially of marginalized people, who have a perception of the world because they are marginalized, because they are victims, because they used to be addicts, because they are discriminated for being a woman or colored, who have a privileged epistemological access to the world. Very, very fruitful, very inspiring way of thinking. Standpoint 3 tells us that we have this, is often meant as a complaint against establishment, and I do realize that is an important part of it, but I want to express the fruitful, the importance, inspiring part of it. That you realize there are many phenomenologies. There's phenomenologies from very many different standpoints, and I think feminist phenomenology is one of the most wonderful developments in today's philosophy. But there's a wonderful book written on queer phenomenology. You see here, so hermeneutics and phenomenology, they merge. They merge. There's no problem, no methodological problem. And I believe that phenomenology and hermeneutics, in fact, do really belong together. Phenomenology is always hermeneutics, and there's a lot of phenomenology in every hermeneutical practice. And this fusion of, and even the development of phenomenology and hermeneutics, but also today's practices, show me, and that's my final words, that philosophy is not an academic discipline. It is something courageous, and this is what I've tried to tell you so far on my last class, which will, as I said, also address the exam and possible questions. I will go for a complete different standpoint. Levinas as the great critic of phenomenology and hermeneutics, but I maintain, I will take Levinas' side for heuristic reasons, but I still maintain that phenomenology and hermeneutics show us that philosophy is not a discipline. It's undisciplined even, I think. It's undisciplined. It's all about courage. See you Thursday. Bye. Thank you.